A rogue Boston judge is trying to force Congress to fund Planned Parenthood. I'm Jim Harden. This is Proof of Life. Interestingly enough, a U.S. District Court judge, and I believe her name is Indira Talwani. She's an Obama appointee, I believe. And she issued a temporary injunction after the Big Beautiful Bill Act was published and signed into law by President Trump on the 4th of July. And she issued this injunction against the enforcement of the spending bill, specifically as it relates to funding Planned Parenthood. She wants to force the government to use taxpayer dollars against the law and force the executive to essentially fund an organization that Congress has refused to fund. And fund activity primarily. The One Big Beautiful Bill actually did not, in point of fact, defund Planned Parenthood. It simply said that we're not going to be using taxpayer funds toward organizations that provide or promote abortion. And since Planned Parenthood is the biggest abortion business on the planet and provides 40% of all U.S. abortions, it stands to reason that they would not receive $800 million in Medicaid funding. And so Planned Parenthood is all up in arms, and they were able to find a rogue justice in Boston to do their bidding. Now, this particular judge didn't even provide any rationale. It was a raw act of judicial power. It's the job, and purely the job, of Congress, initiating from the House, to determine how or to appropriate funds in terms of where and how those funds are going to be spent. And it's the job of the executive to allocate those funds, to spend them. And so it is this particular judge not only is undermining the separation of powers, totally ignoring the role of Congress and the nature of the executive to essentially execute the laws duly enacted by the legislature, but she's thumbing her nose at the Supreme Court. I mean, the Supreme Court just a couple of weeks ago, maybe I think it was the last week of June, issued a ruling saying that it was permissible for states like South Carolina to refuse to use taxpayer funds to fund Planned Parenthood and other abortion providers. Now that you've got that ruling, you know where the Supreme Court stands. And furthermore, it's just laughably ludicrous that a rogue justice can force the U.S. government to spend money where the U.S. government refuses to spend it. It's not her purview. She can't just go around creating things to spend money for just because it happens to be a pet political issue for her. Is this contempt? I mean, she's abusing her power. She's misusing her power. She's undermining the rule of law, using law. She's engaging in activity that would undermine the separation of powers. Is this grounds for impeachment? I mean, at what point in time do you say, look, these justices, they're not helping anything. They're actually engaging the system to clog it up and to undermine it. We don't have to, just because we have a constitutional rule of law where people have the ability, where we have freedom of speech, etc., does not give enemies of the separation of powers and constitutional rule of law the ability to undermine it. It doesn't. And furthermore, let me just say that even if this Judge Talwani had the power to do this, let's just assume that it was perfectly licit, not illicit, to do what she just did in terms of this temporary injunction against the One Big Beautiful Bill and forced the taxpayers of America to fund Planned Parenthood, the biggest abortion business on the planet. Let's just say that she's totally within her purview, her rights to do that as a U.S. District Court judge. It's still within the purview of the president or the executive branch to not allocate those funds, even if she wins in court. Let's just say that, this makes it all the way to the circuit court. The circuit court, gives it a thumbs up and says, yeah, her injunction is perfectly legitimate. And, she certainly can force Congress to fund things Congress doesn't want to fund. And then it goes to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court says, well, I guess we were wrong about the whole South Carolina thing. And, thank you, Judge Talwani, for enlightening us all as to the value of destroying the next generation of citizen through abortion. Let's just assume that all that happens. It's still within the purview of the executive branch not to fund abortion businesses, and specifically, let me just say, Planned Parenthood. And the reason I say that is because of this little thing called the Impoundment Control Act. The Impoundment Control Act. Okay, what this basically says is that the president, through action or inaction, can delay or withhold the enacting of funding or the appropriation of the allocation of funds. He can impound those funds for a period of time. Why? Well, in cases where the organization or entity or contractor that was set to receive those funds is allocated by Congress, that's key, is not following the law or somehow exempted themselves from receiving the funds by not following the laws as duly enacted by their state in which they live, as well as the federal government. And that includes civil rights laws. And so, I say it's within the purview of the president to withhold funds specifically from Planned Parenthood, even if it was determined by the judiciary that they should receive them, despite the fact that Congress says we don't want to fund it. So much has come out with respect to Planned Parenthood's serial medical malpractice. It includes their refusal or lack of reporting sexual abuse of minors. There is an interesting article that came out from many interesting articles that came out from Carol Novelli, who is an excellent journalist, and she basically lists all the various violations that Planned Parenthood has been demonstrated in public record that they've been in violation of the law, which would exempt them from receiving Medicaid funds or Title X funding. Things like, I'm looking now at what she's written here, but things like, Planned Parenthood did not maintain privacy protection for hundreds of thousands of its patients in breaches of data. They have failed to report sexual abuse in minors, violations of civil rights. They've been accused of discrimination by multiple employees, racism, systemic racism within the organization, not to mention the fact that they're basically born out of racism with Margaret Sanger and her eugenics policies to try to eliminate what she considered to be the human weeds of society, including minorities like Black people and the poor. Violating the Americans with Disabilities Act, violating the Family Medical Leave Act, failing to pay employees decent wages, despite the fact that they, except for their executives, they pay them 3 times more than the average nonprofit executive. Shoddy treatment of discrimination against pregnant employees, sexual harassment, wrongful termination. This was also, there was a whistleblower that came out of Planned Parenthood, I believe it was in Arizona, and she was saying that they were failing to report serial sexual abuse and sex trafficking of immigrant women. And she said that this has got to stop. So she came out, she blew the whistle on them, and they fired her. Rodriguez, I believe her name was. And of course, she won a lawsuit for wrongful termination. But this is a pattern of behavior where Planned Parenthood consistently is violating the law, and as such, disqualifies themselves from federal funding. And Alexis McGill Johnson, she's the CEO of Planned Parenthood, the Planned Parenthood Federation, and she's saying that the lack of funding is going to cause us to have to close 200 more Planned Parenthood facilities in underserved population areas. Look, they've been accused of deceptive marketing. Carol Novelli goes on to say The corporations have also been accused of profiting off of the bodies of the children they abort. This is illegally selling aborted baby body parts. They've been accused of fraud on many levels, including Medicaid fraud. But they want to receive $800 million in Medicaid money. All this, she goes on and talks about it. You can find it at liveaction.org under news and check she's got all these allegations are linked. They're not just allegations, by the way. Some of these are abuse, scandal, fraud, racism, pregnancy discrimination, breaches of privacy, Medicaid fraud. I mean, just piles and piles of stuff. Plus, we know for a fact, based on a public record, that Planned Parenthood has been the subject of much medical malpractice lawsuits, specifically in New York State. And now you've got Alexis McGill Johnson coming out, of leader of Planned Parenthood, saying, "Oh, this is going to really harm us. Defunding, it's going to harm women. This is whatever." The reality is Planned Parenthood has been closing sites. They've closed 109 sites just in the last year. Only a little over 20 of them were in states that regulated abortion or outlawed abortion. The rest of them were in states where abortion continues to be legal, including abortion hub states like New York. They closed their flagship operation in Manhattan, named after Margaret Sanger, the racist eugenicist who founded Planned Parenthood. Why are they closing the flagship operation that was partial recipient of $100 million in taxpayer funds in 2024 from New York State, was partial recipient of $24 million worth of grants from New York State and beyond? They've got celebrity support from God knows where. I mean, this isn't this is a scapegoat. They're blaming the One Big Beautiful Bill Act for their fiscal problems. Their fiscal problems are centered not in some injustice that they're suffering under, but in their misappropriation and abuse of funds to accomplish the abuse of women and girls, as well as the destruction of the next generation of citizen. This is Planned Parenthood. This is the abortion industry. They don't care about women's health. They don't care about choice. They don't care about access to health care. They care about power, the power that they want and need to engage and control in population dynamics. And that's what they're doing. So they're now trying to fall back on another product for population control, and that is transgender hormone therapy. Experimental, and we talked about this before, but it is an experimental medical treatment. It shouldn't be considered medical. Interesting times. I don't think this injunction is going to go very far and have much of an impact in terms of Planned Parenthood's ability to continue to receive funds this year, 2025, starting the July 4th. But certainly could engage some sort of delay tactic, which would continue to allow them to provide exorbitant salaries to their executives and to allow them to continue to commit malpractice on women and children. I am Reverend Harden. This is Proof of Life.